interesting world of weather, and with weather comes risk, and with risk comes particular risk to the music industry. So we're going to talk about that now in terms of what's going on out there, how do we think about it, what are the risks and that companies and artists are now seeing, and promoters and tour managers and venue operators are seeing. And so let's just do the intros from my immediate left here. Just say hi and tell us who you are, and then we'll get into some of the questions.
Hello, my name is Kelly Brennan-Klein. I run a business management firm called KBK Management. We specialize in touring artists and large-scale events. Hi.
Hi, everyone. DeMille Halliburton. I'm an exec here in LA at Epic Insurance Brokers. Been doing it for 31 plus years in the entertainment and sports space.
Hi, my name is Rick Farman. I'm one of the co-founders of Superfly. We're an experience company, create all sorts of different types of experiences, from festivals, cons, conferences, location-based entertainment, in lots of different arenas and formats.
So in this moment, being the last, let's call it a year or so, we've been watching the fires and floods and all sorts of biblical things going on out there. Talk a little bit about, first of all, what you're seeing in terms of your artists, your events, your clients. How much of it is already an issue? And let's start with that.
So I think on our side, we're definitely seeing, the cost of insurance, especially for big outdoor festivals, being something that we're thinking through right at the beginning when we're looking at doing an event. And especially for festivals that have lost a year or have lost a show, especially if that's happened multiple years in a row, conversations around, can we continue to do this festival in this space long term, or do we need to move? That's happening quite a bit.
Yeah, DeMille?
I've got some stats.
Ooh.
Only from last year, though, and just in my firm's experience. There were 102 claims all of last year, and over a third of them had to do with weather. Totaling a little over $4 million in claims.
Yeah. And these are all music industry?
Music and touring, yes.
Yeah.
So festivals, touring bands. And that number has creeped up. So there's more frequency and more claims being paid.
Yeah. Rick?
Well, I think as a producer of outdoor events, you're always dealing with climate-related issues. So it's hard, of course, like the whole climate issue, to pinpoint is this particularly more than not. It's great to have those stats because I think that's very telling. But on a day-to-day basis, you're sort of in the mode of always just trying to think through how to plan, how to have the right contingencies in place to deal with weather stuff. And obviously, as we know, we're starting to think about things that we wouldn't have worried about years ago. For instance, at Outside Lands, which we produce, I don't think 15, 20 years ago we were really, when we started it, worried about wildfire smoke potentially being something that we'd have to deal with as an issue, and now we do. So that's the kind of stuff we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I meant to start with this headline that just came across my inbox in the last 36 hours. Lady Gaga, Green Day, Post Malone primed to headline sweltering Coachella Music Festival. And so, of course, one of the things we have to acknowledge is that weather and climate aren't the same thing necessarily. But we're seeing more of these headlines. So Kelly, you talked about insurance. Talk a little bit about what you're experiencing in insurance and how that's affecting not just the cost of your insurance, but even your ability to have a policy, and what happens if you don't.
So I'll say a little bit about what we do in terms of making sure that we're getting the applications in early and in advance, working with our health and safety teams, making sure that they have really good documentation that we can send to the insurance broker, because, as we discussed during our advance call, there it's not a question of, oh, if you do these things, maybe you'll get a better deal. It's if you don't do these things, you're not going to get coverage. And I think one of the things that's really important is not just on the insurance side, but in that health and safety planning. Like we work a lot with a company called Red Rock Entertainment Services, and they do a lot of big festivals with us. And their health and safety team is really great. They put together really important plans of making sure that the crew is hydrated, making sure that the artists are hydrated, making sure that there is a plan in place for if there's a weather emergency, and making sure that that's really clearly communicated to both the artists that are playing and the crew that's on site. And without that documentation and that planning, I think we would struggle to get insurance at all.
Yeah.
So,
Actually, I want to go over to Rick first.
okay.
And come back to you, because I assume that there will be some things that you're going to want to respond to from both of them. So Rick, are you seeing impacts on your ability to get coverage, or the kinds of coverage, or the cost of coverage so far?
Certainly costs on the coverage side have risen. We have not encountered a situation where we can't get coverage, or we can't get the limits that we want, or anything like that. So far, at least, all that's still available. Certainly, you have to think a lot about how all of your vendor agreements and artist agreements and all that stuff interlock into those force majeure situations, which are really kind of the nexus of the insurance piece. Is it all organized in a way that not only serves you, but also serves the sort of ecosystem that you're there a part of supporting?
Yeah, and part of it too, sticking with you, Rick, it's also, it's the crew. Certainly you got thousands or hundreds of thousands or whatever people out there in the audience, but you've got crews, you've got a lot of people working there who have to sometimes work in some of these challenging conditions. Is that starting to become a pinch point for you?
I think it's just a continual thing that we've been seeing as this business, particularly outdoor festivals, continues to mature, that the level of planning and the level of detail that you get to is evolving. And there's no doubt that, you're not just thinking about the audience, you're thinking about the crew. One of the big things is sort of getting in and getting out of spaces, right? Anything you can do to minimize that time frame.
What do you mean by that, getting in and out?
Loading in and loading out, in other words. So the more efficient that you can be, obviously you kind of eliminate some of your risk. So it's trying to sort of think about everything in a capacity of how do we do this in the most efficient way to limit our risk on a lot of different levels. Obviously, as an industry, we've dealt with other things, not just climate-related things over the past decade or two, that also, security issues. We had COVID that, in some ways was an accelerant to thinking about some of those back-of-house protocols. Obviously, we don't do the same things that we were doing then, but some of that muscle memory of planning. So, one silver lining, I guess I would say, is that I think the industry at large, from a production standpoint, it continues to mature, continues to think about how to do things the safest and most efficient way.
You look like you want to jump in? Or?
Well, I was going to see what he had to say, but I'm happy to,
I've boiled it down to planning, as we discussed before, getting contracts and having attorneys that know their stuff, and scheduling. So planning, we were talking about before, especially when it comes to weather, you want to bind coverage well before hurricane season, because once it comes out into the universe and it's named Gilda or whoever, it's automatically excluded if you don't have coverage in force before it is created. So
Can I ask a question about that?
yeah.
Hurricanes can be spotted maybe even before they're named, way out when they're tropical somethings out in the Indian Ocean or the West. At what point does that become a problem for someone who's trying to get a policy?
If you don't have coverage before that storm is named,
It's the naming part.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you have event cancellation non-appearance coverage in place, but you don't have dates in September, August until November, the hurricane season, and you're endorsing a new date, you've got to do it as soon as you can.
Right.
So it's that planning. What we've seen a lot, especially this past year, and most likely it's either due to good business management coupled with booking agents putting the tour together. They're just more savvy to weather situations, so they don't have dates in the southeast during hurricane season. During fire season, they don't have many dates in California or in those areas. So it's when an underwriter in London looks at that, they look at it more favorably, and the rates are better because they know that the booking agent, the team together, is putting a tour that has that in mind.
Some of the things that we also have to look at when we're confirming artists on outdoor stages, especially, is, you know, how many sides of the stage is there? Because that's always part of the question when we're getting coverage, is how many sides are there? Because if it doesn't have 3 sides plus the roof,
Right.
we'll spend more on our policies. And so that's a conversation with the agents as well of, hey, what are we going to do about making sure that we have stages that are going to get...
Yeah,
you know,
so there are base rates, and then it goes into, okay, weather, location, loss history. If a band has had a number of losses, their rate might be increased a little bit. So it's really putting that together. And we mentioned before getting contracts together with promoters. With festivals we were talking about, where the promoter of those festivals are willing to, in the contract with the artist, say, if there's a cancellation due to weather and you were there, ready and willing to perform, they'll give you maybe not 100% of your guarantee, but 50% or more. So that, in turn, will lower the rate for the band that has coverage for their own guarantee.
Now, Rick, you suggested that this isn't yet a pinch point for, at least for Superfly and the various events, Bonnaroo and Outside Lands and some of the great events that you put on. But I can't imagine that you aren't thinking about maybe when and where some of these events take place, that we have hotter, the thing about climate is hotter hots, drier dries, wetter wets, colder colds. And that's got to start to impact as you look forward into your, I'm sure, multi-year planning, and think about not just, obviously, insurance being a piece of this, but also the impact on fans, on artists, on crews.
Yeah, I mean, look, it starts to a certain degree with capital, because most of the things that you're going to do, you're going to need some form of capital, and the capital is going to ask questions as to, are you thinking about all these contingencies? How are you dealing with it? So it really starts at the nexus of just coming up with an idea and trying to figure out how to make it happen, and how to have the resources to do it. I think on the other side of the spectrum, it's what can we be doing as an industry to become more resilient? And I think that's where probably the largest opportunity exists for people who are in the ecosystem of trying to think about, other than things that we can do to mitigate the larger issue, why all of us are here in some capacity today. But on a very sort of tactical level, it's kind of what I was saying before. What can we do to design things that allow us to have them, move in the quickest way? If for some reason a site gets disrupted, during a certain day of your build, are you able to come back and rebuild it in time to get it open? Stuff like that. So a lot of our contingency planning, a lot of our scheduling stuff is certainly taking into account all the different potential hazards that we're dealing with. And obviously the weather thing is still a little bit location dependent. So we have different issues if we're in, San Francisco and the Bay Area in August, as we did when we were producing Bonnaroo in Tennessee in June. Very different issues that you have to plan and mitigate for, and you have to do it like you were referencing before, around the full stack of things, from audience experience, staff experience, artist experience. Everything that's kind of related to that. You have to think through all these things on every level.
Are you starting to see that, sustainability in terms of being able to do a certain event in a certain place, say California desert, in 2-5 years? Does that start to impact, Rick, how you're looking at your long-term planning?
In truth, we really don't. It depends what we're looking at doing. And Superfly has moved in a direction away from a lot of outdoor events, not necessarily because of these issues, although we probably have some PTSD that has caused us to think about not doing stuff in a green field as often as we did when we were younger, and more willing to take those kind of risks, and hadn't had some of the experience we've had. We tend to lead from creative. We tend to lead from a vision, from an idea, and then we try and architect that to make the most sense, for what we're producing. So, a particular new development project that we're working on right now, it's not right for a green field. So we don't have to think about those issues quite as much. Doesn't mean you can't think about them. You don't have to think about them at all, because of course, as we even saw locally here with the fires, even if you're in proximity to something and you're in an indoor venue, your event's going to get disrupted if there's a catastrophe in your general area. So it's probably like a stage 2 thing, concept first and then viability second. And certainly we're taking weather and those things into account. But it is the challenge with climate issues, is you never know when. It's very unpredictable, and to a certain degree you can't totally design and sort of live your life based on when the next catastrophe is happening. So that's the truth of really how we're managing it right now. We'll see where we go from here, but currently that's kind of how we think through things.
I mean, we are seeing each year hotter than the one before, so it's not entirely random, but yep.
Well, for sure that's true. And, I think specifically acutely with outdoor events, I think it's very much, you have to be really thinking about those things, particularly in hotter climates. Just like Emil was saying, I think that was interesting about the routing of the tours and the stuff like that. I think those kind of things we're certainly going to see more of.
Now, how are you thinking about routing? Any differently, Kelly, as a result of what you're seeing out there in the world?
I mean, I've definitely seen festivals move weekends because of multi-year losses, and so again, those conversations are definitely happening. And then I'm curious a little bit if there are things that you guys are doing over at Superfly when it comes. You mentioned that it wasn't causing any challenges right now to get policies in place, but I think part of that also is just because of the depth of your experience that you guys are already submitting. You already know all the things to submit as part of the application process, where maybe newer festivals, if it's their first or their second or their third year, because sometimes we work with new festivals or festivals where they've done it 2 years in a row, and so the conversations around, okay guys, but really we have to plan for these documentation to exist, like that conversation is harder to have with maybe first or second or third year festivals.
Yeah, I mean, we're very blessed by, I think, one of the best production crews in the business, and the interface between the people who are really our project management people and our insurance people is a very tight relationship. So one of the things I recommend for anybody who's sort of looking at producing events is like have that relationship with your insurance broker that they are almost a partner. I mean, they got to see everything. They got to know everything. The more they know, the more that you guys can work as a team to adapt your policies and your coverage and learn from some of the things that you experience to make those things more resilient and stronger. I was sharing a story with these guys. We had a situation where we did have a weather cancellation, and we didn't really have our artist contracts set up in a way that really kind of could help us use some of the insurance money to help pay for some of the artist stuff that we needed to. And this was 10, 15 years ago. We really learned from that, hey, on one side of things, you can look at it, hey, just what do I need to protect? But if you're really trying to build long-term relationships within your community of people that you need to produce these large-scale things, you have to really be thinking about everybody, and you have to have your insurance team and your legal team kind of lockstep with you in that regard. So it's a really, you're always trying to think about it from a holistic perspective.
Yeah. DeMille, you talked about the fact that premiums are going up, at least for some of your clients, and that you've been working to be creative, or you're advising clients to be creative. Talk about what are some of those creative measures you're advising.
Yeah, and it really depends on the experience of the touring band, how long they've been around, how much money they're making, because, some bands can't afford a business manager. They have a booking agent and they're, a van driving around the country. So, but those ways to try to keep the costs down as much as possible, you don't have to insure the maximum amount of the guarantee that you're getting or the expenses that you have. So if you can't afford it, but you want to have some type of stopgap, you can insure 50% of your guarantee. You might throw in a one-day deductible that you'll self-insure. So if it's something that's really bad where it goes more than one day, where you have multiple day losses, that'll keep the premium down if you have that additional deductible. We were talking about scheduling. If you can put the scheduling together where you have weather in mind. You were mentioning that there are so many unknowns out there that the best thing to do relating to the insurance is making sure that you have a broker partner that is getting the most comprehensive coverage possible. During COVID, which is not weather related, but during COVID, our clients that were on tour actually had coverage because of the manuscripted policy that we had, where a lot of touring bands were kind of out of luck.
Are you finding that there are some bands that just have to do without? And what are the implications? If that's true, what are the implications of a band going without coverage?
They're taking a chance of torpedoing the whole tour.
Yeah. Kelly, I think you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think obviously there are different types of policies. And I think when it comes to, you're talking about the cost-saving methods of, only insuring a portion of the guarantee or only insuring a portion of your costs instead of your guarantee. We're seeing that not just with smaller artists. Most of our smaller artists can't afford cancellation coverage to begin with, and they're lucky if they have health insurance and a general liability policy.
Right.
But for our larger artists even, we're definitely looking at that as ways that we can keep the costs down because it's expensive right now.
Not even expensive. Some of the large artists that we have to beg and plead and work with the business manager to really let them know what the costs are. It's not really the cost for them. They don't think that it's going to happen. They don't think that they could get injured. They don't think that there could be a volcano eruption in Iceland that shut down airports for a week. It's just weird things happen, and you just have to have coverage to cover that.
Bankruptcy is not fun.
Say it again?
Bankruptcy is not fun.
Yeah, no, it's not.
It's not insurable either.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where are we going with this? I mean, the trends are clear. Heat and just disruptive weather is increasing. It's not linear, but it's happening. As you look forward in the next year or two or three, what keeps you up at night, Kelly?
My 6-year-old, but also
So many things.
so many things. But I think the thing to me that's most important, obviously, is our artists and their band and crew's health and safety when it comes to making sure that everybody's hydrated, making sure that their fans are safe. The stuff that happened with Taylor Swift down in South America was really tragic, and so making sure that part of the planning also includes how are we going to make sure that as temperatures are rising, our fans and our band and our crew who are out there working 110-degree weather are all taken care of.
Yeah.
The main thing that keeps me up at night is communicating with everyone. Sometimes the artist doesn't tell you, oh, I'm doing a spot date in so-and-so, and we have no idea it's happening. So I lose sleep over making sure that we know what's happening so that we can protect everyone.
Yeah, Rick?
Well, I think the biggest inflection point with a lot of these climate things is going to come with whether insurance is available or not.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see it in a lot of coastal areas. I think we're going to see it in a lot of areas that, are traditionally hot. Cancellation insurance, when you're risking tens of millions of dollars on a production, is paramount to the survival of your business, and you have to have it. So I think, although the price, there is a price point where you really can't afford it, we're not there yet, but that's what I worry about is, either, and these are small markets too. I mean, there's not that many underwriters for these types of policies. So all it takes is, a couple occurrences that are, terrible, and all of a sudden you can be without it. And I think that would have a very profound effect on the development of certain types of events and experiences.
What's the advice you want to leave this community with in terms of, I know, I'll start with you, Dimil, because you talked about talking much earlier in the process about the needs of a band or a tour or an event. But I'd love to hear from each of you, but start with you, Jamil. What are your takeaways you want to make sure everyone knows?
Is taking it seriously and planning with your team, your booking agent, your business manager, your attorney, your insurance broker. It's paramount. And I was gonna interrupt you when you said, we have this creative vision, and then the insurance guy said, you can't do it.
Rick, what's your takeaway that you want to make sure people know about this topic?
Well, I think it's two things. One is, I think we're all here because we have a platform in some capacity, through experiences, through the art that we're all supporting, to make some, statement about how to do this better. And in that regard, I think there are a lot of things that we can do to show people how to do things better, be good examples, good stewards. And then on another level, these are very big systematic things that need to be corrected in our society. And so I think, we've got to uplift the conversation into a broader, perspective, and we've got to get artists and we've got to get the best voices that we can speaking about these things to affect some sort of change. From a very practical day-to-day standpoint, it's all about, what can we do to be nimble? And that's where I think there is some opportunity for innovation. I think, if I was sort of creating the vendor slate, you would create things that are, sort of more resilient to these issues. And I think that's probably what you'll see is products and design that just have to take this into account like you would, in real estate or any other thing that's going to be affected by climate.
Yeah. Kelly, you can get the last word.
Love it. I think it's very similar in terms of planning ahead and then making sure that all of your partners are thinking about what the weather implications are on the tour, whether that's your legal team and your insurance team and your business manager and your agent, but also your production team, and making sure that you're not going to wind up in a situation where, the lighting isn't all waterproofed and then suddenly, there's a storm and you've got an equipment loss, which is a different thing, but still very expensive. So making sure that all team members, not just legal, insurance, business management, agent, are really thinking through the problems and the solutions.
Yeah. It's early days in all of this. There's a lot more shoes to fall, I think, and a lot more interesting and potentially frightening things to happen here. So, but this is really, I think, early stage peek into what's coming and what we need to be thinking about. So thank you all for having this conversation, helping us understand where we are and where we probably will be going. Please join me in thanking our panel.